You can hand them out if you want to. We'll go ahead and get started. Good evening again. There's, just so you know, there's ice water and some cookies back there if you want a little snack or something. I'm Deacon Mike, and first thing I want to do is, again, as I did this morning, thank Father John, the staff here, for encouraging me to do this. We had a couple of months ago an expert that came in. They're trying to adjust the sound now. So Russ Braille, who's an expert on the Shroud, came in and did a presentation. And so I had mentioned to Father that a couple of years ago that I'd like to do a presentation on the Shroud, and it just, with COVID and everything that happened, we didn't get around to it. So my presentation will be a little bit different than Russ's in the sense that I'm just going to kind of share a lot of personal experience. As I told some people here at Mass a few weeks ago, the Shroud of Turin is actually the thing that God used to draw me back into the church. So, again, I want to thank Father John for encouraging and supporting and all the staff here. The shroud that you see here, the linen, I have to thank the Sisters of Visitation too, because this is a replica that they loaned me for the presentation. So if you actually went to Turin to see the shroud, this is what it would look like over there. So this is a very realistic replica, and we're going to talk more about that. So we've been listening the past few weeks during this Easter season as the church is giving us different names of Jesus, for instance, to give us different images. And of course, what you see in front of you is more images that also will help us to give us greater insight into who Jesus is for us. Each name can bring forth a new and powerful image. We hear the scriptures describe Jesus as the good shepherd, the one who lays down his life for the sheep, or as the sheep gate and the way to enter into the presence of God. He's the Alpha and the Omega, as we hear in Revelation. He's the beginning and the end. He is the bread of life, the food for us on our journey to eternal life. He is the just one, the King of Kings, the Lamb of God, and as we heard, he is the true vine. We are the branches. St. John says he is the Word made flesh, and he is the way, the truth, and the life. St. Paul tells us he is the image of God for all of us to see, and that's in 2 Corinthians. So again, I brought an image to share with you tonight because it's the image, as I said, the tool that God used to draw me back into the church. So let me digress a little bit and say it was in the year 1982 that I had been going to Catholic church here in Atlanta for a couple of years. My wife is cradle Catholic. She grew up in the church. I came from a Protestant background. When we were getting married back in those days, the Protestant had to sign a paper for the church saying that you would let your children be brought up in the Catholic church. Today that's changed. The Catholic now has to sign, not the Protestant. But so anyway, so I said, sure, I want my children to be brought up, in the Christian church. And to me, it didn't make any difference which one at that particular time. I was 29 years old or so when I went to I guess started getting the call to come back into the church some. My wife, the children, we had two children, and they had both started school. She was a stay-at-home mom. She decided that she wanted to go to work part-time, so that was okay. But then that part-time turned into full-time, and then that full-time turned into having to work on Sundays sometimes. So she came to me and she says, look, I've been taking the kids to Sunday school, CCD, all these years. You're going to have to step up and do this some. And I said, okay, it's all right. I guess I can do that. I feel like I'm half responsible to do, So I started going to take them to their CCD classes on Sunday. I have to go ahead and say, too, at that particular time, Sunday was the only day I had off, about 3 Sundays a month. One, I would usually be working, so I was what people might call a workaholic. But I started taking them to the CCD classes, and I would sit in the fellowship hall with all the other dads. We'd have coffee and a donut while the kids were in their CCD. And at the same time, oftentimes there were adult faith enrichment classes going on. So if there was a topic that was being taught that interested me, I would drop in for that. And I was there one Sunday, and my wife was at work, and so her mother, who was a very short little lady, but she had a very powerful voice and personality. She was, of course, from New Orleans, so she was French Cajun. And she came to me, and she said, the children are going to go on a field trip, and they need some drivers for the carpool. She said, well, I've offered to let them, to take some children in my car, but they're going downtown to see a show, and I don't drive downtown. So she said, will you drive? And I said, no, I don't want to go see any kiddie show. She says, come on, if you don't drive, some of these children won't get to go. And that was my first taste of Catholic guilt. So I said, okay, so we piled into the cars, and there was 5 or 6 cars going downtown, 75, downtown to Atlanta. And we got down to what was, back then, was the Omni Hotel. We went into the underground parking, and all the kids were getting out. Everybody was all excited, and I was just sitting in the car. She says, come on, aren't you going to go in? I said, no. I don't really want to see a kiddie show. I'll just wait here. She says, well, it may be a couple of hours. Come on, I'll pay your way. Again. So we went in and went into the lobby there and went down, and there was some windows, and they had these posters up, and it was talking about the Shroud of Turin. Again, this is 1982. I've never heard of the Shroud of Turin. And so we went in, and when you go in, there was about a 20-minute talk by Episcopal priest there, Father Kim Dreisbach, and he would talk to you, and then he had this exhibit set up with a lot of the equipment and the things that they used in the 1978 investigation. 40 of the world's top scientists had gotten together and gone to Turin, Italy, and they were given, the church gave them a week to examine the shroud. So they had 120 hours, 5 days, that they could examine the shroud. So they had, he had actually a bunch of the equipment and all that they had used, and a lot of the pictures that were blown up, you know, like you see. And he had a full-length replica of the shroud there. And some of you may have been there and seen that. So we went in, we listened to the talk, and then we started through the hallways and was listening because it was recorded, and they were given all this history and things. And at one point, we went down a long hallway, and as we turned the corner, another long hallway at the very end was the full-length picture of the man in the shroud. And I have to tell you, when I saw that, it just blew me away. I was looking at that, and I can't really explain what happened, but all the doubt just seemed to go away. And for me, I was looking at that, and I just thought, oh my God, this really is real. This really happened. This guy really existed. This wasn't just something like the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny that people tell you about to try to make you be good, right? He really suffered all these things. And here's this evidence that we're listening to. So we went on through, and I was kind of shocked and in a daze as we went on through the rest of the exhibit. And I have to tell you, on the way back home, the car was quiet. So we got back, and we talked to my mother-in-law and I, and we talked a little bit about it. But the next weekend, I was back down there. And the next weekend, I was back. I would take people from church. I would take people from work that I talked to about it. I was taking family, friends, anybody that wanted to go, I would take them down to that exhibit and go through. Even some people, I'd pay their way. So I got to be such a regular fixture down there that Father Dreisbach that Easter asked me if I would come in because I had memorized everything in the tour. So he would start one group going through, and they would listen to the 20-minute talk, and then he'd start them through the exhibit, and then I would do the 20-minute talk to the next group and then bring them through, so we were doubling it up. Well, like I said, we had a pretty good relationship, so that when the exhibit was closing, I asked him if I could film it, and he gave me permission. But it was only that I would not use it except for just personal use. So if you remember back in 1982, a camcorder was about this big and about this deep, and it would put on your shoulder, and I went through that whole thing and filmed the whole thing. Boy, my shoulder was wore out. And I had that video that I kept until just a few years ago. I had given it to someone to make a CD for me, but the video was already too bad, crumbled up, they couldn't. So, but anyway, I just share that. So that was kind of the step. At that point, I knew that I wanted to follow Jesus, but I wanted to make sure I was in the right place to do that. And so I started going to different churches. Many of you can relate to this probably. Wednesday nights, I'd be at the non-denominational, and then another night or day, I'd be at another one. I was going to the Catholic Church on Sundays. And then in 1986, I came into the Catholic Church at the Easter Vigil. And that year, I had met a priest that was pretty new here to the diocese. He was my sponsor, and his name was Austin Fogarty. So some of you may know him, red-headed Irishman. Anyway, it was his first year, and he was teaching the RCIA that year. And I was the guy that was sitting in the back. There were about 20 of us. And I was the guy that was sitting in the back that was raising my hand and quoting scriptures to him, you know. He'd say something about this, and I'd say, yes, Father, but the Bible says. And so we went on like that for a few times. And then one night he was standing up there. I don't remember what the comment was, but when I said something and quoted the scripture, his face got as red as his hair. And he just looked at me and he said, Michael, this is not a forum for debate. See me after class. So that's where it started. So every Wednesday night after classes, I'd go to the rectory and we'd sit there and debate for hours. And he said, how do you remember all this stuff? It's what we were taught when we were children. It's what we had, right? Bible stories and things. So anyway, we had a really good relationship, and like I said, he was my sponsor. The night I came in at that Easter Vigil, my mother-in-law stood in because he was on the altar. And so she stood in, and the pastor came around with a microphone, and he was asking the sponsors, you know, what they thought about the candidate coming in. So he came to my mother-in-law, and he put the microphone, and he says, what do you think about Michael coming into the church? And she didn't miss a beat. She just said, I've been praying for it for 14 years. Monica, right? So anyway, that's where it kind of started. I came into the church because at that particular time, and I still believe today, that the Catholic Church has a fuller revelation of the truth. And that's what drew me in. Of course, I was one of those skeptics. I said, if you can't see it or touch it, you know, it don't exist, right? I was one of the world's biggest skeptics. And I believe science could explain everything. Again, that's why God used this particular tool to bring me in. Because it's like he's saying, okay, Michael, let your science explain this. So, that's enough about me and mine. Let's talk about the shroud. So, we look at some of the historical evidence, and of course, one of the first things is that all four Gospels mention this linen, right? Every single one of them mentions this linen at the burial. And I'm not going to read all of them. I have them here, but I'm not going to read all of them. But they tell us about the tomb. You know, Joseph of Arimathea had this tomb that no man had ever been laid in. And they tell us that the women went to the tomb that morning, early that morning. It was still dark, but that wasn't early enough, right? Because Jesus was already gone. So they went there, and the tomb was empty. And you hear that over in the gospel. The tomb was empty. The tomb was empty. But the tomb really wasn't empty, was it? Because the linen garments were still there. John tells us that in his gospel. He and Peter went, and they looked inside, and there was the linen and the face cloth that had been wrapping the body, folded up in a different place. So he uses linen, in a sense, in the plural. And so there was more than one. Well, some people today will argue that it couldn't be the shroud because it had to be the little linens. They think of embalming process like mummies. But the Jewish tradition did not do that. As a matter of fact, if they would be so against that after 400 years in bondage in Egypt and after what happened to them wandering in the wilderness, anything that had to do with Egyptian gods and Egyptian customs, they would have been away from that. So their burial practice, which you'll see, you'll hear, was exactly like what you find encoded in the information in the shroud. So they go, they find the tomb empty, the cloths there. So you hear about all that, but then you don't hear what happened to the cloths, what happened to the linen. And that's what we want to kind of talk about. So we heard a couple of months ago, we had a priest in that brought in a relic. It was the arm of St. Jude Thaddeus. Remember, many of you were here, you saw that. One of the things that struck me when I heard that that was coming was the fact that it's his arm, right? So Jude Thaddeus goes to Edessa to bring King Abgar, who's suffering from leprosy. Now, the tradition is that he had sent word because he had heard about this Jewish rabbi that had the ability to cure diseases. So he had sent and asked for Jesus to come. But unfortunately, Jesus was arrested and executed before he ever went to there. So Jude comes bringing the shroud. It's not called the Shroud of Turin at the end. It's actually given a name there. But they said when he entered into the king's court, he came in with this garment, this linen, and it was folded up, and the face was in the center, and he was carrying it like this as he entered into the king's presence. And again, that's why I think about the arm. But it's also part of the tradition that you see today when at Mass you see the deacon come in carrying the book of Gospels into the presence. So kind of where that may have come from. So anyway, the king, Abgar, is healed, becomes Christian, and starts, many of the people there, it becomes a very thriving Christian community. So, and of course the apostles are there, disciples are there, but then when he dies, his son becomes king, and he's very anti-Christian. So he starts persecuting the community. So the shroud is hidden because it would have been destroyed had it not been. So it kind of disappears then for a little while. Just to give you an idea of how the Jewish burial rite went, after the crucifixion, then the body would have been taken down and laid in the shroud like this. One of the things this doesn't show, that would be very hard to carry a body like that. One of the things it doesn't show, but that we know today, that the information is in the shroud, is that if you look across this top edge of the shroud, you see that line that runs all the way down? That was where a piece of the shroud was torn off and then used as the tie to tie around the feet, the knees, the waist, and the chest. Now, it was so important to those first Christians that they did not discard that. They sewed it back on. So, remember again, it had blood on it probably, and so you couldn't just you couldn't show that or tell people because it would have been considered unclean. So we have linens, the shroud, the tie, and the face cloth that were there in the tomb. So this is the Mandilion. This is, of course, an image of this. This is King Abgar and Jude Thaddeus, who's bringing it into his presence. And that's the 1st century. The image of Edessa, then, the Mandilion, as it's being called at that particular time. Here's a little history of it, a brief history of the Edessa cloth. In 30, the disciple brings it. In 55, it's hidden in a niche above the gate. And then in 525, it was rediscovered. The reason it was rediscovered is because there was a severe flood that the cathedral was destroyed, and as they were cleaning up all the damage and all, then they found the shroud. So that stayed there, and then in 944, it was brought to Constantinople, again, to protect it because the Persians were attacking Edessa. So it was brought to Constantinople. It stayed in Constantinople until 1204 when the Fourth Crusade came in and wiped out Constantinople. It disappeared, but there's actually written documents, records of it being there. So it was a part of an inventory that the Knights Templar had. It shows up again then in 1355 in Lille, France, and it happens to be in the family of one of the great Knights Templar. It's in his family. It's being passed down. So then it passes down to the Charney family. In 1452 then, they trade it for some land and 2 castles. Then in 1506, Pope Pius declared its May Shroud Feast Day. In 1532, the temple where it was being stored, not the temple, but the cathedral, where it was being stored, was caught fire. The shroud was actually in a silver case, a casket, and it got so hot in the fire that the silver melted. Some of it dripped onto the cloth, and that's what those scorch marks you see on the cloth, those are from that 1532 fire. Remember, it's folded up now, so anything that hot got on one corner, it would burn all through down to the bottom. So the burn marks were pretty much the same. The Poor Clare nuns patch, those were patches that they put on the shroud. And those stayed on there until 2007. Those were removed just recently. Okay, then again, just a little bit more of the history. So we have a clear documented history for most of the time, but there are some spaces in our history, in our timeline, which you have another example on the papers. There's several different timelines, but you can actually trace it back. It was known by several different names. For the last 500 years, it's been known as the Shroud of Turin. And here, again, another example of how the body would have been. Here's some of the images of Edessa, and as you see, many of those are large cloths, but then when you fold them, and Dr. John Jackson was one of the original members that went on the 1978 investigation, and for the last 20 years of his life, he was so interested in the folds and all of the cloth and how it had been done. That he spent 20 years working on. That's how we found out about the piece here that was stitched back on. And of course, when the carbon dating test was done, that was done from that corner down there. But of course, that was already debunked years ago, but still today you'll hear everybody go back to carbon-14 dating, carbon-14. But it was a fairly new science back then. So anyway, we'll go on and talk a little bit more about some of those things. Again, as I said, in 525, they discovered it hidden in a niche in the wall. So why the silence from Colosseum to Constantine? There was, a small persecuted community that had possession. The burial cloths were ritually unclean. The shroud contained an image, and images were forbidden by Mosaic law. Revealing its existence would encourage enemies to try to seize it and destroy it. The iconoclasts, if they could have gotten it, they would have destroyed it. But one of the miraculous things is that we still have it today, after all that was done. And it's not just something from ancient history. Think about it. In 1938, the shroud was taken from Turin to a monastery in northern Italy and hidden until 1949. Remember why? Because Hitler was looking for all the religious relics he could get. So if he could have gotten his hands on that one, he would have, but he didn't. That's Constantinople, of course. And then we had, in 1204, it was taken by Crusaders. Here's a picture from a Hungarian prayer book. This is actually, the date is very accurate on this. It's from 1192 to 1195. And you see in the top photo, that's supposed to be Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, and John. And they're there, preparing the body. One of the keys on this, of course, is that if you look at the hands, for instance, you'll see only 4 fingers, right? The reason, of course, for that, we know now, is because when he was nailed to the cross, it wasn't through the palm, but through the wrist. And if you take 2 fingers and do like this, and you find that little niche, if you push in, you'll find the median nerve. The median nerve pulls the thumb in. So there's no thumbs showing. And that's true today. You can do that yourself. You can feel the pull if you just mash in on your wrist. So when the nails went through, they damaged that median nerve. Pull the thumbs in. On the bottom picture, you'll see the ladies that came to the tomb, three Marys, and they're bringing their spices to anoint the body. The angel's there, and he says, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead? He's not here." So you have the empty cloth there, but if you notice, the cloth is the 3-in-1 herringbone twill, which is the cloth, the linen that the shroud is. It's a 3-to-1 herringbone twill. So the artist had to have seen the shroud to be able to put these details in. So that means the shroud had to exist 1192 to 1195, which is 300 years before the carbon dating gives it. Again, another reason. Here's a medal of an exposition in Lille, France from 1355. This one was discovered in a river, and it's now in the British Museum. So you can see it shows the heraldics of Godfrey de Charny and his wife Jean de Verge, and those are the two shields with their family coat of arms. And of course, that's the shroud above it. And it was either two bishops or two angels that were holding it up. Here's another one. This one was a souvenir of an exposition in 1608. And in this one, you see how they're all holding the edges up there? So again, one of the things that again, another one of the things that struck me was St. Francis de Sales was actually there and was one of the bishops that was holding that. And he writes about it. This is 1613. Francis de Sales says that he was one of the bishops holding the shroud when it was shown to the people. The day was very warm, and the Archbishop of Turin warned Francis to be careful lest his sweat follow the shroud. So Francis wrote to St. Jane de Chantal and told her, he said that it occurred to me to tell him that our Lord was not so dainty, and he shed his own sweat and blood for no other purpose than to mix them with ours and give them as a price for eternal life. Yeah, yeah, and that one was an artist, and the next one was actually cut in wood. One is cut in wood, but this one, again, you can see the detail that they've put into the shroud. So, I think that 400 years ago, you could see more in the detail than you can see now. I think it has faded some through the centuries, but we'll see some more. See, this one right here is an engraving by Antonio Tempest. This is 1613. There's another one from 1663. And then in 1898, the very first photograph was taken. So remember, photography was only about 40 or 50 years old at this time. This would have been one of the first cameras. This is Seconda Pia, and that's the camera he used. And of course, remember, the cameras then used big glass plates. And so when he took that first picture, there's the advertising the showing of it. When he took that first picture, they said that when he was developing that negative, that glass plate, when he held it up and he started seeing the image come on it, he almost dropped the glass plate. He was so overwhelmed, believing that he was seeing the first person to see Jesus is face to face in 1900 years. Of course, when he took that picture in 1898, Pope Leo XIII was Pope then. The Pope that gave us of course, the documents on workers, and also gave us the St. Michael prayer. He was the longest reigning Pope third longest reigning pope in our history until John Paul II passed him. So he's the fourth longest reigning pope. This is actually the negative that they have now still. And again, one of the interesting things is that they discovered with this was the fact that the cloth, the linen itself, is a photographic negative. And when you take a picture of it, your negative becomes the positive, which is reversed. And the other thing is, how do you make a piece of linen able to be a photographic negative? So there is a way you can do that, but of course when the scientists examined this one, there's nothing. You can make a silver oxidized paste and cover, and you can make it into a photographic, be like a piece of paper, like you would do a mirror backing. But there's no chemicals, no dyes, no paint, nothing in the shroud. Here's again another one from 1933. And again, the pictures don't give it justice here, but there's much more detail in the shroud that you could be standing on the street and look than what we can see today, even back then. This is St. John's Cathedral in Turin, and it's added right on to the Royal Palace. Is there, I'll show you. This is where it's kept all the time. Again, we have, this was in 1978, people gathered. They had about 3 million people that came to see the exhibit. There's another one. This is when the stirrup team was going in 1978 to do their investigation. And most of the members that were there would tell you that they figured they were going to go in, they were going to unveil the cloth, and within 20 or 30 minutes they were going to prove it was a fraud, and they were going to leave. But they took 8,000 pounds of equipment with them. They wanted to make sure they could prove this was a fraud. So they brought it out. It had a backing cloth on it. It had been on there for hundreds of years. So they take the backing cloth off. They had a special table built where they could put the cloth on, the shroud on, and attach it with magnets so there was no holes poked in it or no way to damage it. And the table was empty on the back, so they could turn it up and put a fluorescent behind it and show fluorescent through the backlight it. And that's when they found out that the blood images went all the way through the cloth, and the water stains and the scorch marks went all the way through the cloth. You can see that backlighting it, but the image did not. It disappeared when you backlit it. So then what they discovered was that the blood was on the cloth first. The image came later because there's no image under the blood. And wouldn't that be right? He was taken down off the cross, put in the shroud, taken to the tomb. 2.5 days later, he was resurrected. That's when the image went in, see. So this is what it would look like then when they got it on the table. They took the backing off. Notice the white gloves. Everybody's being very delicate. Now, after hundreds of years of people handling it and sweating on it, and that's, of course, what it looked like. So they photographed every square inch. They of course, looked at the back, and it was like, oh, my God, this is real blood. They tested it, to be human blood with serum. It's AB positive. It's too old, they said, to get a DNA chain off of it, but here's where they were looking through the back of it, and this is where the pathologist said, oh my gosh, this is real blood. Another interesting thing is that the blood is red. It shows up as red. Anything that old would be brown or black, right? So the blood shows up as red because there's a lot of bilirubin in there, which makes it keep that color. And of course, that means also that when the blood went on, like in the place where he was pierced in the side, that's the blood from a corpse. It's not a blood from a live person, it's blood from a corpse. So he was dead. So that again puts an end to the rumor that they were spreading back then, that he wasn't really dead, he didn't really die. He was just, passed out, and they took him to the tomb, resuscitated him, and brought him out. Nope, he was dead. So again, the blood was first, and then the image was second. You can see the blood. Here you can see the weave of the cloth, the 3-to-1 herringbone twill. And here's a picture. I wanted to show this one because you could see one thread has hundreds and hundreds of fibrils, right? So the blood goes all the way through, the water stains, everything. But the image itself is only 1 or 2 fibrils deep. So to give you an idea of what that's like, if one thread was your arm, then the image would only be 1 or 2 hairs on your arm. They say that the image is so delicate you could take something and rub across like a razor and rub across there. If you took off a couple of those top fibrils, then the image would be gone. Another interesting little fact they know now, because our science, our technology is so good, the fibril, the image goes all the way around the outside edge of the fibril, but it does not penetrate through to the center. So it goes all the way around, but not into the center. Again, like I said, they set up their cameras. They pictured every square inch. That's Barry Schwartz. He was the photographer. He's got a website out. He's been involved with the Shroud ever since. He's Jewish, and he'll tell you that it hasn't, he's not converted. He's still Jewish, but he tells you he believes it really is. This is the linen shroud that wrapped the body of Jesus, but it does not prove divinity or anything like that. But he says definitely this is the burial cloth of that man. He was a Jewish man. Yes, sir?
You said earlier that when the scientists showed up with their 8,000 pounds of equipment, they said 20 minutes and we'll be able to prove. What do you think, have we heard, what was it that after that 20 minutes caused them to say, oh, wait a minute?
Everything. Everything. Every test they did looking for an answer only brought more questions. So everything they did just kept them digging deeper and deeper, to the point where many of those men spent the rest of their lives, many of them have died now, many of them spent the rest of their lives researching and trying to discover what's caused this image. Like I said, they knew that there was no paints, no stains, no dyes, nothing in this material no rubs, no dust. One of the things they did do is, in 78, they did use Scotch tape. A Swiss botanist used Scotch tape and stuck it to different places and picked up pollens off of the cloth. And out of those pollens, he identified 54 pollens, and many botanists have gone through his research and done their own now, and this is all true. Almost every one of those pollens, of course, he could show you where it was in, but of the 54, I think 43 of those pollens are only in the Jerusalem, Judea area. 2 of those pollens, the plants have been extinct since about 200 AD. So, The special part is that the image goes around the fibril, but it does not pierce and go inside the fibril. So what does that mean? That means that whatever caused the image was able to touch every part of the fibril on the outside, but it did not pass through it. like if you had put some kind of fluid or paint or anything else on that fibril, it would have soaked all the way through. Yeah. No. So this is Dr. Max Fried. He's the one that not only did he get pollens, but he also got soil. He got some dirt samples from the feet area, from the knees, and from the nose and cheek. So, like I said, he tested the pollens, and he found this is the plant that had the most pollens, and that was around the head. And of course, this is the plant that's the Christ crown. It's the plant that the crown of thorns was made from. So then he can give you a line of where it had been, and all these different places, the pollens, and it shows you exactly how it went. And of course, the other thing is that the cloth had to be in those areas for a couple of 100 years for it to be able to pick up those pollens and all like it did. So this is the other one. So he took the soil samples, and they've did the spectrometry test on those, and it's a piece of travertine aragonite, limestone. So they did the samples on it, and it's a very unique type, and it's found, the scientists tell us that it's like a fingerprint, and it's found all around Jerusalem, and in the caves and the tombs. So the man in the shroud had to have been there to pick up that dirt, to get it on his feet, his knees. Of course, we know that he was carrying the cross. He fell, and he didn't just fall. He fell all the way because he had dirt on his face, too. So this is a Roman flagrum, and, of course, a Roman nail. And we do have those things now. Archaeologists uncovered many things in Pompeii that were buried and preserved under the ash. Also, they found cloth materials from Masada, and they've tested those, and then there's been more tests in recent years with some of the things from the shroud, not carbon, but there've been other tests that have been done, and they match up exactly. The experts tell us now that the shroud will date between 100 BC and 100 AD, with a medium range of 50 AD, so right in the time frame. So the Roman flagrum would have had three lashes, and you see the little balls at the end. They're like little lead weights that they would have been using for their nets for fishing and things. They're little lead weights. So they would have had one of those on the end, and if you take those and put them on the shroud, you can match up the wounds from the scourging exactly with that kind of weight. So he evidently received a double punishment, because they said there were two men that beat him, and they can tell because the arc of the whipping was higher on one side than it was on the other. So one man was taller than the other. They gave him 60 lashes. There's 720 wounds that's been counted on the body. And this is the spear, of course. Like I said, we've got these kinds of things now that have been uncovered in our history. This is the crown of thorns, of course. And most of the time you see a nice little tiara. Most all the artists paint that in, right? But the shroud gives us, again, more detail. So what we really think it looked like, this is the crown of thorns plant that it would have been made from. And this is a first century Roman helmet. And so what people said, instead of a Roman soldier standing there and making a nice little tiara, he probably would have took his helmet off and just wrapped it up with thorns, put that on his head. Remember, we're told they had to beat it down with rod. So it would have been more like a helmet, a cap of thorns, not just a little. And we know that because on the shroud you can see the blood images from the top of the head all around the sides of the head. That's a picture I took in 2000. Like I said, these don't come out so good when you stretch them out for a slide, but here's one of the frontal. So you can see what the shroud looks like, and when you take a picture, you get a negative of it. It's almost like an X-ray. We can enhance that with technology to where you can get pictures like this now. So you can see his fingers. You can see the nail holes in the wrist. The blood looks like it's running backwards, but you got to remember the arms were up like this, so the blood was running down the arms, nailed up on the cross. He was beat. You can see the back here. Those are all wounds. Those are all wounds from the scourging. He was naked. That was another thing that the Romans were very good at torture, and they had done this many, many times. Mark, can you get that off? Or can you turn the speakers off there? So he, again, one of the things that the Romans did was they were experts at torture like this and at crucifixion. They crucified a lot. Remember, when Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, they crucified 6,000 people around the walls and crucified people all the way back to Rome. They were so angry, so filled with rage at how many Romans had died in that war. Anyway, they were experts at this. So men, and it had to be a humiliating thing, so that you were done. It was done when you were naked. They say that the Romans were merciful with women. They let them choose to be either frontwards or backwards for the modesty. Anyway, so you can see another thing on this one. If you look up here, you see the white. That's, of course, the white is showing up much darker because that's a lot of blood that's caught there. But one of the penalties, remember, we hear this in the scripture, the penalty for blasphemy, and they told Jesus, they called him a blasphemer, the penalty for blasphemy was pulling out the mustache and the beard, plucking the mustache and the beard. And we can see that the man in the shroud had his beard and his mustache pulled out. And he was also, remember, we also hear in Scripture that the guard struck a blow, struck him and said, you don't talk to the high priest that way, right? And, of course, you can't see it on this one too good, but the cartilage is separated. The nose is broken, but it's not a bone, so not a bone was broken. And there's a lot of swelling in the cheeks, so he was punched pretty bad. There you can see a better one of the face. You can see the hands, see the forefingers, thumbs are turned in. And the beating was front and back. I mean, the scourging was from head to toe. This is a picture from the VP8 image analyzer, and it's not so good, but what that machine actually does, NASA developed that machine to be able to map the surface of, for instance, the moon. So we as humans, we can see like 20 shades of gray. The VP8 image analyzer can see 220 shades of gray. And what that does is it allows them to take a picture and look at the light and the darkness and get distance. So, for instance, you could take a picture, put it in the VP8, and it can tell you where the mountains and ridges, where the valleys are. So they could map a place to try to land a lunar ship, right? So they use this then, and it's kind of extraordinary. They put a picture of the shroud in there, and it shows you the light, the dark. It gives you the depth. If you put a regular picture, like if I took a picture or you took a picture of me and put it in there, it would just be a big blur, just a big flat blur. But the shroud actually has 3D information encoded in it. So it gives you, so they were able to use that and actually make a replica of the man in the shroud, which you've heard about those, I'm sure. So another piece of information that's good is they actually, as you see on the right-hand side, the eyes look just really big, and it's kind of The facial features don't look quite right. You can see the nose and the mustache and all. Then on the left, on the one on the left, you can actually see with the computer enhancement the two coins on the eyes, the widow's mite. You remember the story in the scripture where Jesus was bragging on the lady that put her 2 coins in? One of the things people don't realize is that those are the 2 coins. When he said she's given out of her need, you know, the rich people are putting in out of their excess. She's given out of her need. Those 2 coins were the coins that she would have been carrying for her death, for her burial. But she put them in. On here, on the shroud, you can actually see, and now they've, show you. The coins, they've actually been able to pull up, and both the coins were minted in 29 AD. So these are some other coins that came out then later on that have Jesus' image on them. Here's one, a coin that was minted during the reign of Justin in 692 to 695. And again, you can see the characteristics of that coin, of the long nose and everything, because they had seen the shroud. And it's done after that. That's one of the things that another scientist tells us about. He raised it for the first time in the early 20th century, Paul Vignon. He says that in history, there must have been a photograph or something, not a photograph, but there must have been an image that people used when they were painting Christ. Because if you look in the catacombs in those first couple of centuries, Christ looked more like a Roman citizen. He had short hair, no beard, Roman-type clothing, very clean cut, you know. But then all of a sudden, in the 500s, it changed. And all the pictures then, like we saw with the Mandylion, all the pictures started with the same kind of characteristics. And if you look at them, you can what he did is he overlaid then a lot of the pictures over the shroud, and there were like 12, 15 points of congruence in every one of them. So we see some of that too. So, again, so when you look at the pictures, you can almost see the face of the shroud or details from it in every one of those pictures that started being painted all over the world. And there's some of his congruences. He just takes this is the Prancocate, this one's from the 11th century in Athens, and when you take it and impose this over it, everything lines up. So what he's saying is that artists had something as a model that they used when they started painting these pictures of Jesus, and the thing they used was the shroud. So this is the group when they were meeting, you know, after, like I said, after about a week. It says, we can conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human, of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist. The blood stains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin. The image is an ongoing mystery, and until further chemical studies are made, perhaps by this group of scientists or perhaps by some scientists in the future, the problem remains unsolved. That was their conclusions after all this. Okay. So, again, here's your good image of what it looks like. And 2,000 years ago, Pontius Pilate said, "Behold the man, et homo." But what does the church say? Because you hear this oftentimes, well, the church has made no final declaration or anything. The church can talk to us about faith, but it leaves science to determine the science. So popes of the Catholic Church have repeatedly asked us to venerate the holy face of Jesus since that very first photo was taken. Remember, 1898, Pope Leo XIII was the pope. And he declared that the image of the Holy Shroud with its undeniable revelation of the true likeness of Christ was a providential event and a means well adapted in our time to stimulate everywhere a revival of the religious spirit. So let's look at what the church says. St. Pius, 1903 to 1914. He referred to the photograph as the true image of the Holy Shroud and declared that it can be a very effective aid in meditating on the passion and death of our divine Savior. St. Pius X expressed the desire that this image be published and seen around the world and venerated in every Christian family. He recommended it to all and priests and gave special blessing to all who propagate the image and devotion to Jesus Christ pictured on the Holy Shroud. Pius XII approved the medallion of the Holy Face of Jesus produced by the Blessed Sister Maria Parida de Micheli based on the image of the Shroud of Turin. He also declared the feast of the Holy Face of Jesus as Shroud Tuesday, the Tuesday before Ash Wednesday, for all Roman Catholics. The Pope asked the faithful to spread knowledge and veneration of so great and sacred a relic. Most people don't realize that Tuesday is not Fat Tuesday or Shrove Tuesday. It's actually the optional memorial for the Holy Face of Jesus. Pope John XXIII, I was in his home where he grew up, and he had a picture of the shroud in the living room. And on seeing the relic, he said, "This can only be the Lord's doing." There we see the finger of God, painted by the finger of God. Pope Paul VI, he said, add these words, "The Holy Face of Jesus printed on the Holy Shroud of Turin appeared to us so true, so profound, so human and divine, that we admired and loved it like no other image." Pope John Paul the Great. And he went to visit twice. He had it open for veneration in 1998 and 2000, the Jubilee year. That was the first time my wife and I got to go. And that was like a dream come true to see the real one. St. John Paul said, "An image that everyone sees but no one can explain. The Holy Shroud is the most splendid relic of the passion and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. We become what we contemplate. Why don't we contemplate the icon of icons, the Holy Face of Jesus? Instead of icons made by man, let us venerate the greatest icon of all, the Holy Face of Jesus." Whoops. Pope Benedict XVI. An icon written in blood by the finger of God. That's him praying. He said, Pope Benedict XVI said that it corresponds to everything that the Gospels say of Jesus. The Shroud of Turin is a truly mysterious image which no human artistry was capable of producing. In some inexplicable way, it appeared imprinted upon cloth and claims to show the true face of Christ, the crucified and risen Lord. Pope Francis, I join all of you gathered in the Holy Shroud. Thank the Lord for offering this opportunity. Thanks also to new devices. We do not merely look. If we are looking at it, it is not a simple look, but it is a form of veneration, a look of prayer, and also it is a way of letting Him look at us. That's his prayer he did for that. We were able to go back in 2015 for the second time and see it. This is at Turin. Turin, Italy. Okay, so that's the way it looks now. And remember, you might have seen again. You can see the whip marks, the hair, the blood on the back. See on the back of the head, all the way up into the top of the head. The feet, there's a lot of blood that gathered on the feet. You can see the wounds from the nails in the feet. So the great hoax, this is the 3 labs that had the carbon 14 testing in 1988, and they're the ones that came out in the newspaper said, the great hoax. But really, and look at, they put an exclamation point there at the 1390, like, this is it. But the great hoax is on them because they've discovered now so much was wrong. I don't know if you realize the data from their experiments and all was not released to the public. They've kept it. For 30 years, they would not release any of their data. And it took a Freedom of Information Act to get the British Museum to release the data, which they just released in 2017. And so as a scientist looked through all this data, I mean, it's just terrible. They just threw out so much stuff and just kind of picked and chose what they wanted to put in, and this is what they came up with. So really the great hoax was not the Shroud, but the investigation that was being done. This shows you a picture of where the piece of linen was taken from the Shroud, and it was in, like I said, in that top corner where you see that little box over there. And again, showing you a place where they cut it out, and then they cut the samples and sent them to the labs. But when the Pope gave permission for them to do this, and Cardinal Ratzinger was cardinal in the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith then, what they were supposed to do was take a little piece from 7 different places, and then it was supposed to be given to the labs without telling them what it was or what they were doing, and then they were supposed to test that and just come back independently and give their results, which none of that happened. They all got the sample from the same place, they all got together, discussed all their results and everything, and then they came back and gave their finding. So that's one of the reasons the Vatican has not allowed, one of the reasons they've not allowed it to happen again. The other is because you have to destroy that material that you take for carbon dating. But there are other tests now that you don't have to destroy parts of the Shroud, and those have already been done. And again, like I said, those tests are showing that it is from 1st century. Here's, again, one of the threads that was in that. You can see the residue because in that patch, when the Poor Clares patched that, they used cotton on the linen. And of course, the linen was already yellowed, so they used a paste. They made a paste with a dye and put it on the cotton, which was white, to give it that yellowish effect. Well, you can see that here, some of the residue from that paste. So the test couldn't have been good. Another one of the rumors was that, remember, they said Leonardo da Vinci painted it. Unfortunately, as you've already seen, we've got history of this cloth hundreds of years before he was born, so not likely. Then the other cloth that I was telling you about is, of course, the Sudarium of Orvieto, and that would have been the face cloth, and they've taken that and overlaid it with, first they did blood samples, they did the blood test. It matches, all of it matches. They overlaid it with the Shroud, and the blood spots, everything matches up perfectly. So the scientists tell you 100% both of these linens covered the same dead body. Well, the Sudarium, we know, we have the history of it from when it went from Jerusalem to Spain. It went to Spain in 616, and it's documented and written about and been shown. It's been there ever since. So that if they both were covering the same body, then that means the Shroud had to be before 616 also. Yeah, but what's happened with the DNA is that the blood is too old to get a DNA strain to map the DNA. They say after a few hundred years you won't be able to do that. So again, it just kind of blows everybody's dreams of Jurassic Park, you know, kind of blows it away. No, they can tell you the blood is a male and it's AB positive, but other than that. And that was a very rare blood for us, but in that particular time in Judea, for Hebrew males, that was pretty common blood. Mm-hmm. Yeah, So when he was on the cross, when he expired on the cross, before they would take him down, they would put a cloth around. It sounds kind of gory, but remember, there was blood, a lot of mucus, slough, a lot of fluids coming out. So they put the face cloth on, they lower him down, then they put him in the shroud and take him to the tomb. Well, in the tomb is where they would normally clean the body, put the herbs and spices and everything on. And so there, they didn't get to do any of that because remember, it was the evening and the Sabbath was fixing to come, so they had to hurry out. So Sunday morning, the women were going to go back and do that, but the body was gone. So the face cloth was laying there, John tells us, folded up and laying in its place, and the other claws were still there. That's what I wanted to get to. So here's, of course, this just shows you how they overlay the Siderium and the Shroud of Turin, and all the congruences, they match up. New experience on the Shroud show it's not medieval, and that have published a book with the results of some of the chemical and mechanical tests which confirm that the Shroud dates back to the 1st century. Again, there's been many experiments done. So it's all really true. He did live, he did suffer, he did die out of love for us. This is a computer. They just gave the computer the colors red to mark the blood. So this is kind of what it would look like. They tell us that if you'd have seen Jesus on that day after the scourging, he would have looked like the victim of 3rd-degree burns over most of his body. So John says, I saw and believed. What did he see? The burial cloth still bound but collapsed. No body. So if you lock in and something's going to convince you, if you think about the shroud was still there and that tie was still there, but there was no body. We get another little piece of that from the scripture, because remember when Jesus went to Martha and Mary's, when he raised Lazarus from the dead, when Lazarus came out of the tomb, what did he say? Untie him and let him go free, right? He was still bound up in his burial cloth. So maybe John looked in, he saw everything there, but no body. We don't know, but. So Dr. Robert Spritzer, he's a physicist. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's one of the top world-renowned physicists now. And he's got a website that's a really good one to go to if you want to look at a lot of the physics stuff. A lot of it can be over your head, but he does a lot of excellent work. It's called the Magus Center. And he says today, and most of all the scientists agree now, that the image was formed by radiation. And so what you can see, again, in some of that slides I showed you, was that it's not just the body that you see, but like in the hands, you can actually see the bones with the flesh around. If you were a person that could read x-rays, you would be able to see this much better than us that aren't trained in that. But it's almost like the picture is an x-ray that shows the outside of the body and the skeletal too. And again, all of that within 2 fibrils of the material. So, as I said, you can even see the bone in the spine back in the back going up. So, John chapter 20, he says, on that first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early in the morning, remember? Then they ran there, and he beat Peter. Now, we don't know if that's because he was so much younger, but he beat Peter to the tomb, and then he waited. He didn't go in. He stooped and looked in, but he didn't go in. Then when Peter got there, they went in. And it says, they saw the linen cloths there, and he says, I saw and believed. Well, that was me. John said, the disciples saw and believed. That was me. I saw, I believed. Some call it the 5th gospel. But I believe it's the evidence written by the finger of God in the tomb of Gethsemane some 30 or 40 years before that first gospel was written by man. And this linen cloth is recorded, all the information that is later written down by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And some information that I've shown you, much of the information encoded in the shroud that's not even in the scriptures. So what we really have is physical, scientific proof of what those documents tell us. So we have documented proof of what happened, and now we also have scientific, physical proof of what happened. So we have monument and writings. So one of my favorites, of course, was Father Drosbach's saying, there's all kinds of different names for the shroud. When Russ was here, he gave everybody a receipt. He said, this is, what the shroud is. This is your receipt. Jesus has paid the price for you, and this is your receipt. I like this one. That says that it's God's love letter in linen to the whole human race. So, questions? Uh-huh.
So the nails went from the inside of the palm out, hello, out through the wrist. And so it was on an angle. It wasn't straight through because it had to capture tendon. Yeah, but what he's
proof that shows exactly where everything was and how it happened. Okay? Yeah. In Hebrew, the word that we translate palm would so when it what that so as that would hold before it would tear loose. I know it's getting late, but
Did they anoint the body before they put it in the shroud? Or they
wanting to do it. So say 165 to 175 pounds. 5'10". 5'6" was the average height for a Jewish male in that time. So he was a little bit taller than the average male, but nothing, that would make him stand out. So. they will warn you that being that it is cloth, it could have been stretched a little bit one way or the other, so. Yes.
So we see the nails came here, like you say. Why do you think that when the saints get the stigmata, they get it here and not here?
And I couldn't give you the answer for that one. There are, again, Father Spritzer can give you a good answer to that. He's got some papers and all out on that. But why does someone, when they get the stigmata, get it in the palm instead of in the wrist? So, yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah. So you can, like I'm saying, all I can tell you is what the evidence shows, and then what's happening when someone gets the stigmata, I can't tell you. This one, this is actually a tile. This is a Jewish, it would be a Jewish prayer cloth. So this would be the shawl that they would put in when they went into synagogue or pray. Yeah, remember the tassels. Jesus actually said, you know, beware of those Pharisees. They like to lengthen their tassels to make them feel important, you know. So there's actually, and I don't know, there's actually a certain amount of knots in all. Everything is biblical. There's a certain amount of knots in all they're supposed to be in. This is not a real Jewish one. This is actually one for Christian prayer. And it's done in English, so I would not use a real Jewish prayer shawl. I have one, but I wouldn't use it for a display. So.
Illustration. And then there's also that story about the 4-year-old boy who visited heaven, you know, came back, and then allegedly, this is a picture of Christ, that vision, you know, her vision. Pictures from the shroud that you can see now that look more natural.
Well, yeah, the scientists got together and they used the information that was in the shroud, and they actually produced a full body figure with sculpture using that information, and it really looks very good. Of course, you know, the legs are bent because he was in rigor mortis when he was, you know, taken down off the cross. So, well, that's one that Matt, yeah, he's made one, I think, in bronze. Yeah, but there's one that's done in marble that you can actually, it's in Rome now, but they've included, in that one, they've included the scourging and the blood marks and things, so, yeah. No, but I will tell you what the experts tell. Another one is Father Andrew Dalton. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's got a website out. He's actually a graduate from Georgia Tech and went to Rome. He's a Legionnaire of Christ now, or Legionnaire. And he's actually opened, he's a professor there for theology at Rome. And he has a course that has been set up now. It's a year-long course where you can go and get a master's certificate in Shroud studies. And so what he says is that a lot of times people will see things in things. Like we had here a few years ago when there was a billboard with spaghetti and they said Jesus' face was in there. You know, different things like, I'm not making a joke or anything about, because people do see different things. I have a friend that in a concrete block wall where some water had stained up the wall, and it looked like the Virgin Mary was there, and they had some people come out and look, and it was just water seeping through and some mildew and all that had made the stains. I'm not saying that that's, but people will see different things. Some people, I'll tell you this, there's some scientists that have seen, when they look at this, they see the images of plant flowers, like there were flowers laid out around the edges of the shroud. So some people have actually seen some of the flowers in there. But again, the scientists, but there's no evidence of it. You know, if you blow it up and look at it.
That's right in your face. You
Yeah.
can't even see it.
It looks like the eyebrows and the forehead.
Yeah, I mean, you can see this because of the blood.
Right, that's my point.
Yeah.
There's number 3 there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can see the 3, the squiggly mark. Again, that's blood that's embedded in the brow. But you can also see the cross if you do this.
Oh, stop.
Just saying. just saying. I didn't put a picture of that. I didn't put a picture of that model, but there is a real nice model you can go on and look at that they've done with all the measurements and everything they've taken from the shroud. So, yeah, you can see the blood there now, and it does look like the shape of a cross running right down his nose. Okay, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I read that the Romans would break the knees
Yes.
past death.
Right. Because remember, the actual death was being caused by suffocation. In other words, you're there and your lungs are filling up with fluid. And so you have to push yourself up to draw breath. So you're pushing yourself up on the nails in your feet and pulling yourself up with the nails through your arm. So it would take a long time to die that way. So if they wanted to hurry it up, they would break the legs. You couldn't push yourself up anymore. So you would drown in your own body fluids. But when they came to Jesus, remember, he was already dead, so they didn't have to break his bones. But they did pierce his side with a lance, and John tells us, out came blood and water. Well, what does serum look like? Looks like water. And so when you look at the shrouds in that, you can actually see with the ultraviolet light, you can see the blood, and then around that looks like a halo, and that's the serum. That's the water that flowed out. So it looked like water, but it was actually serum that flowed out. So again, that tells you, that's proof that the man was dead. So, yes, ma'am.
Do we know why a soldier pierced him? Because he knew he was dead already.
Sure.
Was that
To make sure. Yeah, to make sure he wasn't just faking it or in a coma or something. Yeah, he pierced him to make sure that he was dead. So. Huh? Yeah. So, yes, sir. Right. And that's in the shroud. I didn't bring that in. But if you look in the information, you'll see on the back shoulders there's abrasions here and here. So, again, some of the artists will portray Jesus carrying the whole cross, the T cross. But what would happen, the Romans would already have that planted in the ground, and then he would have been carrying this way. So he was carrying this way, and when he fell, if you're tied to that, you can't stop yourself from hitting the ground. So he got dirt in his face and dirt on his knees, and that's where they got that from. But there's abrasions on the shoulder blades, and that's from carrying that. So that's why they say that Simon had to help him, because he was so weak, so drained, they didn't think he was going to make it up to Golgotha. So that's when they forced Simon of Cyrene to help carry that tibula. So there's so much more information. Like I said, you can spend hours and hours looking at the different pieces.
Were those spikes the standard issue when people got crucified, or just special people got the big spikes?
It just depended on who it was and what they did. They used what would have been a 6-inch roofing nail, and that would have been square. Remember, in those days, they didn't have the machines that we have, so they would have been hammering those things out on an anvil with a fire, and they would have been, the nails themselves would have been pointed, but they were square, and that's, again, the wounds through the wrist and the feet show that. I didn't put a slide up, but there's one that actually shows how it went in at an angle in the feet and in there. And that was one of the nails that I showed you. It's a 6-inch roofing nail. These are just some I use for the display. So, but remember, those guys were really good. Women were really good nail drivers in that day, in those days. Remember in the scriptures we hear the story, was it Susanna that takes the tent peg and one time, boom, right through the head. You know, she pinned him to the ground, right? Because women were the ones taking the tents up and down as they moved all the time. So they would have been really good at driving tent spikes. So.
But the Roman soldiers, which were male, were the ones that drove the nails
Yeah.
into Jesus.
Yeah. And again, some of the history tells us that the Romans, they used people from the places they conquered. And so they actually had mercenaries from Syria that would have been in the legions then. And they used the Syrian mercenaries to do this kind of torture because they were experts at it. So, thank you.
About carrying the cross.
Mm-hmm.
We only talk about Jesus' 5 wounds.
Mm-hmm.
So if he had the whole cross, he would have the one wound on the left shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Did you say he only carried the horizontal?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then
Yeah.
why are we talking about 5 wounds?
We are, because there were still 5 wounds.
Yeah, but not,
There's-
what about the other one?
There's the 2 in the hands,
2 in the feet.
2 in the feet, and the piercing of the side. That's 5.
Oh, they're not counting the shoulder.
Mm-mm.
Why
Okay,
the
thank you.
wound on the side and
Because
not
you're-
straight to the heart?
It was.
Oh,
So
went
it
up
pierced
to-
between the 5th and the 6th rib. It went up into the left ventricle and pierced it, and that's where the blood and the water flowed out
Is
from.
that what caused the death?
No, he was already dead.
I'm sorry.
He was already dead. So